They say desperation makes people do crazy things. But what if the craziest thing you ever did wasn't even your choice? Meet Sophia Reynolds, 25, smart, broke, drowning in debt and just one emergency away from total ruin. Rent's overdue. Her car, barely holding itself together with duct tape and prayers. And let's not even talk about those student loans, because at this point, they feel more like a life sentence than a financial obligation. So when she stumbles across a classified ad offering a ridiculous amount of money for what seems like the easiest medical trial ever, she doesn't just consider it, she grabs it like a lifeline. The job? Simple. Fertility research, no sex, no risk, just a few weeks of testing and a fat paycheck at the end. It's all legal, all confidential, all science. But let's be honest, money like that? For doing almost nothing? Too good to be true. And yet, there she is, signing the paperwork. No questions asked. Just a quiet clinic, a smooth-talking doctor, and a contract so thick it could double as a phone book. But hey, who actually reads those things, right? The only weird part? The donor. Some ultra-wealthy anonymous mystery man funding the entire thing. No name, no face, just a contract that makes one thing very, very clear. She will never know who he is. And more importantly, she will never, under any circumstances, get pregnant. The clinic swears it's impossible. And Sophia? She believes them. Until a few weeks later, when her body tells her a very, very different story. Morning sickness, mood swings, a pregnancy test that practically screams at her in two bright pink lines. And just like that, her life isn't just complicated, it's dangerous, because the baby growing inside her was never supposed to exist. And the man who unknowingly fathered it, let's just say, he's not the kind of man you keep secrets from. There's something about being in a clinical, white-walled room that makes you feel small, powerless, like just another number on a chart, just another body being examined under fluorescent lights. Sophia told herself it was just a study, just science, nothing personal, nothing weird. But as she sat there, dressed in a flimsy hospital gown that barely covered her ass, watching a nurse handle her file like it was some classified government document, a tiny voice in her head whispered, "Something isn't right." But money talks, and when you're broke, you learn to ignore gut feelings. The doctor, Dr. Hensley, tall, handsome in that, "Trust me, I have a PhD" kind of way, flashed his rehearsed, corporate-approved smile. "You're in excellent hands, Miss Reynolds. Everything is perfectly safe." Safe? Right. The whole thing was strangely impersonal. No warm bedside manner, no unnecessary small talk. Just tests, injections, checkups, a routine procedure, they called it. Sophia had signed a dozen forms swearing she understood that this was all experimental. She wasn't here to conceive. She wasn't here to become some miracle mom. This was just a test. But then, why the secrecy? Why couldn't she know who the donor was? Why couldn't she even ask? Confidentiality is key, they said. Our clients value discretion. Clients, not donors. Clients. Red flag? Maybe. But then again, what did it matter? She wasn't here for love, for romance, for some accidental billionaire baby plotline. She was here for a paycheck. And so she did what broke girls do. She ignored the warning signs. The procedure itself was bizarre. It wasn't like some romantic, candlelit night with a mysterious, powerful stranger. Oh no. It was cold, clinical, and about as intimate as a car getting an oil change. Legs up, body exposed, machines beeping. And then, a moment, a fleeting, split-second shiver ran through her, like her body knew something before her mind could catch up, like some invisible line had been crossed. But before she could even process the thought, Dr. Hensley patted her knee, flashed another sterile smile, and said, "Congratulations, you're officially part of scientific history." Scientific history. What a weird way to put it. But she wouldn't think about that. Not yet. Not until a few weeks later, when that same body that shivered under the clinic's lights would betray her in the most unthinkable way. Because the man who paid for this experiment, the one whose identity she was never supposed to know, the one who was never ever supposed to be a father, his seed didn't just take, it thrived. And now the real experiment begins. Sophia always thought pregnancy was something you planned, something you dreamed about, something that came after love, commitment, and a Pinterest board full of baby names. Not after signing a contract she barely read. Not after a cold, sterile procedure performed by a doctor who treated her like a lab rat instead of a woman. And definitely not like this. Yet here she was, standing in her tiny bathroom, staring down at a piece of plastic that had just changed her entire life. Two pink lines, bold, unapologetic, like a slap to the face. Pregnant. The word felt foreign, wrong, impossible. Her stomach flipped as she tried to remember everything the clinic had told her. There is absolutely no risk of pregnancy. This is a controlled experiment. Nothing will come of it. Lies. Her hands trembled as she took another test, and another. 5 in total, each one screaming the same result. Somewhere in the universe, God or science or fate itself had looked at that contract, laughed and said, "Watch this." Panic twisted in her gut. This wasn't supposed to happen. And yet, here she was. At first, she convinced herself the clinic would fix it. There had to be a mistake, a mix-up, something they could do. So she dialed their number, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "New Gen Fertility Clinic, how can I help you?" The second she explained her situation, the voice on the other end changed. Calm, too calm, cold. "That's not possible," the receptionist said. "Our procedures are fail-proof." Fail-proof? Then what the hell was growing inside her right now? "A food baby?" Sophia insisted. She demanded answers. An emergency appointment. A retest. Something. And then, as if rehearsed, the woman on the phone gave a tight, controlled laugh and said the words that made Sophia's blood run cold. "You must be mistaken, Miss Reynolds. You are not pregnant." "Excuse me." She held 5 tests in her shaking hands. Her body was changing. She knew. And yet they were acting like she was crazy, gaslighting her, dismissing her, erasing her. And then before she could argue, the line went dead. That's when the fear truly set in. This wasn't just an accident. This was something bigger. Because if they were willing to pretend she didn't exist, how many other women had been in this exact position? How many others had gotten a positive test, called the clinic, only to vanish? A quick Google search pulled up nothing. No online reviews, no patient stories. Just a perfectly curated website and a list of accolades that suddenly felt meaningless. And that's when she realized. This wasn't about science, this was about control. Sophia wasn't just some random girl who got caught up in an experiment. She was a liability. And whatever was growing inside her, someone, somewhere, was willing to do anything to make sure it never saw the light of day. Sophia thought the worst part of this nightmare was the pregnancy itself, the shock, the fear, the realization that she'd been lied to, used, manipulated. Oh, how wrong she was. Because the second she started digging for answers was the second she realized she wasn't just dealing with some unethical clinic or a medical mistake. She was up against something bigger, darker, untouchable. And at the very top of it all, him, Zain Al-Fayez, a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms, feared in courtrooms, and worshipped in bedrooms. A man who controlled empires like they were pieces on a chessboard. A man who had no intention of ever being a father. And yet, here she was, carrying his child. The discovery came in pieces like shards of glass slicing through her reality. A fake name on the contract, a shell company funding the clinic, a trail of buried lawsuits, silenced women, and money that always seemed to disappear at just the right time. Zain wasn't just a donor, he was the experiment, or rather his bloodline was. Because men like him, they didn't just leave accidental heirs scattered across the world. They didn't take risks. They built dynasties, controlled their legacies, and made sure that no one, no woman, no child, no mistake could threaten their kingdom. And if one did, it was handled. Sophia swallowed hard as she scrolled through the evidence on her screen, her stomach twisting with something colder than fear. How many others had there been before her? How many women had unknowingly carried his blood, only to disappear before they could give birth? She thought about that phone call, the way the clinic had tried to erase her, like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. Not an inconvenience, a loose end. And loose ends, they got cut. Her fingers trembled as she clicked on a headline buried deep in the archives. A former clinic patient, young, healthy, pregnant, died in a tragic accident. Another woman, same clinic, same story, disappeared. No family, no follow-ups, no birth records. Sophia's breath hitched. This wasn't just about a pregnancy. This was about survival. She was carrying something they didn't want to exist. And if she wasn't careful, she wouldn't exist either. Her gaze flickered down to her belly, still flat but no longer just hers. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the life inside her, a life they would do anything to erase. She had two options: run, hide, hope she could stay ahead of men who had the power to find anyone, anywhere, or fight. Use the one thing that made her dangerous, the fact that she now carried the most valuable secret in the world. But before she could decide, a sound sent ice through her veins. A knock at the door. Software insistent. Wrong. Because it was 2 a.m., and she wasn't expecting visitors. The knock at the door wasn't just a sound. It was a warning, a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. 1, 2, 3. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't in a hurry. Like they already knew she was awake. Like they were giving her just enough time to decide, run or face them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't expecting visitors. No one knew where she lived. No one was supposed to know. And yet, he was here. She didn't have to open the door to feel it, to know. Zain Al-Fayez had found her. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the doorknob. Every instinct in her body screamed, don't. But then his voice, low, smooth, dangerous in the way only a man who's used to getting what he wants can be. Sophia, her stomach flipped, her breath caught. God, even through the door, he sounded like sin wrapped in silk. Open the door, now. Not a request, a command. And Sophia, she was so damn tired of being told what to do. So instead of obeying like a good little girl, she clenched her jaw and stayed silent. A pause, a long one, and then a dark chuckle, like he was amused, like he had expected this little act of rebellion, like he enjoyed it. I see. A pause. You're scared. Damn right she was scared, but she wasn't stupid, and she sure as hell wasn't about to let some billionaire with too much power and too little conscience intimidate her. She straightened her spine, forcing steel into her voice. I have nothing to say to you. Oh, I think you do. Another pause. I think you have everything to say to me. His voice dipped lower, smoother, like he was drawing her into a game she didn't even know the rules to. I think you've been keeping a very, very dangerous secret, Sophia. Her pulse spiked, because that was the moment she realized he knew. He knew about the pregnancy. He knew about his child. And yet, he wasn't furious, not yet. That was the scary part, the quiet before the storm. Because men like Zain, they didn't lose control. They didn't scream. They didn't throw tantrums. They strategized. They planned. And they always, always got what they wanted. You can't touch me, she shot back, forcing herself to sound braver than she felt. There are laws, rights. Another laugh, darker this time. Laws? Oh, sweetheart. She could hear the smirk in his voice. I own the laws. Chills ran down her spine, and then just when she thought he would push, just when she thought he would demand, he did the one thing she wasn't prepared for. He gave her a choice. Open the door, he murmured, voice softer now. Let's talk. A pause. Or make me come back when I'm not in such a generous mood. A threat wrapped in velvet. A promise laced with danger. Sophia swallowed, because the truth was, The second she opened that door, she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to close it again. Sophia should have run, should have packed a bag, slipped out the back, and vanished before he ever had the chance to corner her. But she didn't, because there was something terrifyingly magnetic about the way Zain al-Faiz stood in her doorway. Tall, powerful, dangerous. Like a king who had finally come to claim what was his. And the worst part, she was what he was here for. The tension was thick enough to strangle her as he stepped inside without waiting for permission. His cologne, a mix of wealth, dominance, and something purely male, filling the tiny space like it had every intention of staying. He shut the door behind him, locked it. Her stomach flipped. "I didn't say you could come in." A slow smirk. "And yet here I am." God, he was infuriating. Arrogant in a way that wasn't just confidence, it was certainty. Like he already knew how this conversation would end. Like he knew he'd already won. She folded her arms over her chest, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you want?" Zayn tilted his head, studying her. A lion watching a mouse that didn't quite understand it was already caught. Then slowly, too slowly, he stepped closer. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. Close enough that she could smell the danger on him. "I think you already know." Her breath hitched. Because she did. This wasn't about the clinic, not about the contract, not even about the mistake they swore could never happen. This was about the baby. His baby. And if she thought for even a second that Zayn al-Faiz was the kind of man who would walk away from something that belonged to him, she was dead wrong. "I don't care how rich or powerful you are," she said, lifting her chin. "You can't force me to do anything." A slow, dark chuckle. "Sophia." That voice. That voice. Low, smooth and dripping with amusement, like she'd just told him the funniest joke in the world. He leaned in, close enough that she swore she could feel his lips brush against the shell of her ear. "Sweetheart, I don't have to force you." Her breath caught. His voice dipped lower, softer, deadlier. "I don't lose, I don't negotiate, and I don't leave things unfinished." A pause, a smirk. "And you, Sophia, you are very, very unfinished." Heat shot through her veins, anger and something dangerously close to desire, twisting into something she couldn't control. She stepped back. He followed. She raised a wall. He shattered it. "I won't let you take my baby," she whispered. Zayn tilted his head, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and something far more dangerous. "Your baby?" He took another step closer, dropping his voice into something dark and possessive. "Oh, Sophia, that's where you're wrong." A beat, a smirk. Then, "Our baby." The words hung in the air like a slow-burning fuse, ready to ignite something explosive. Sophia's breath hitched, her fingers instinctively curling into fists. She had prepared for threats, for intimidation, for the ruthless billionaire standing in front of her to wield his power like a weapon. But she hadn't prepared for this, for the possessiveness in his voice, for the way those two simple words sent a shiver down her spine. Not just from fear, but from something far more dangerous, something far more reckless. She took a shaky step back, but Zayn followed, his movements slow, deliberate, like a predator toying with his prey. "This isn't a negotiation," he murmured. "This isn't a contract you can rip up and walk away from." His voice dipped lower, silk laced with steel. "This is blood. My blood." A pause, a smirk. "Our blood." Sophia's stomach twisted. She had spent months telling herself that she could do this alone, that she had to do this alone, that no amount of money, no amount of power, no amount of dark, intoxicating charm could ever make her trust him. But now he was standing in front of her, looking at her like she was the most infuriating, fascinating, impossible thing he had ever laid eyes on. And worst of all, like she already belonged to him. "You don't own me," she snapped, lifting her chin. "And you sure as hell don't own my child." A slow, knowing smirk. "Don't I?" Her pulse spiked. Because that was the thing about Zayn al-Faiz. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to make threats. He just had to be there. to let his presence, his wealth, his sheer power do all the talking. I will raise this baby alone, she continued, forcing steel into her voice. I don't need you. I don't want you. Another smirk, darker this time. Liar. Sophia's breath caught. Because the worst part? Somewhere deep down in the part of her she tried to ignore. Maybe he was right. Maybe the thought of doing this alone terrified her. Maybe the idea of walking away from him, of never letting her child know the man who had created them, hurt more than she wanted to admit. But none of that mattered. Because men like Zane, they didn't stay, they didn't love, they didn't protect, they took, and she wasn't about to let him take her baby. Sophia straightened her spine, forcing herself to meet his gaze. If you think you can control me, if you think you can just snap your fingers and make me fall in line. Zane took another step forward, so close now that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. I don't expect you to fall in line, he murmured. His fingers brushed against her jaw, barely a touch, just enough to make her feel it. The warmth, the control, the undeniable pull. I expect you to fight me. His voice was low, sinful, a challenge wrapped in promise. But here's the thing, Sophia. He leaned in, his breath teasing her skin, his lips just inches from hers. I always win. And just like that, she realized this wasn't just a battle for her baby. It was a battle for herself. And if she wasn't careful, she might lose both. Zain Al-Fayez was a man who never lost. Not in business, not in power, not in anything. And now the one thing standing between him and ultimate control wasn't a rival billionaire. It was her. Sophia stood across from him, chest rising and falling, her fists clenched at her sides. She should have been scared, should have been begging for mercy. Instead, she was defying him. You think you can just claim me, claim our child like you own us? She hissed. Like we're part of your empire? A slow, dangerous smirk curved on Zane's lips. Oh, Sophia, he murmured, stepping closer. You're not part of my empire. A pause, a breath, a promise. You are the empire. Her pulse pounded. He wasn't lying. That was the worst part. Because she had uncovered something big, something that could burn his world to the ground. A scandal, one buried so deep no one was ever supposed to find it. But she had. And now she had two choices. She could destroy him, or she could stand beside him. Her grip tightened on the folder in her hands. It was all there. The proof, the leverage, the power. Zane watched her carefully, like a king deciding whether to conquer or offer a crown. You can walk away, he said, voice smooth, seductive. You can raise our child alone. Keep running, keep hiding. He stepped closer, too close. But you'll never be free. Sophia's breath hitched, because he wasn't threatening her. He was warning her, because if she took him down, she'd be painting a target on her back. If she exposed his secrets, she wouldn't just be destroying him, she'd be destroying herself. And the worst part, she wasn't sure she even wanted to. Not anymore. Not when the devil standing in front of her was offering something far more tempting than just a deal. He was offering power, power she had never had, power she had never wanted, until now. His voice was velvet and sin, wrapping around her like a dark promise. You don't have to fight me, Sophia. His fingers traced the edge of her jaw. You can rule with me. Her breath caught. This was insanity. She should have said no. She should have walked away. But instead, she whispered the most dangerous words of her life. Prove it. Sophia was never supposed to be here. She was supposed to sign the contract, take the money, walk away. But fate had other plans. Now she wasn't just carrying his child, she was carrying his greatest weakness, and that made her the most dangerous woman in his world. So she disappeared, gone, vanished, leaving nothing behind but a trail of unanswered questions and a ruthless billionaire who had never been denied anything in his life. But Zain Al-Fayez wasn't a man who accepted loss. And Sophia, she was no longer a woman who played by the rules. So when he finally found her, when he showed up on her doorstep with an offer that could change everything, She didn't slam the door in his face. She let him in. Because this wasn't just about a baby. This wasn't just about money. This was about power, and for the first time in her life, Sophia wasn't afraid to take it. She was supposed to be erased. Now, she was rewriting the rules. She ran. She hid. But a man like Zayn never stops hunting. If you were her, would you fight him or rule with him? Sophia always thought she had a choice, that she could fight him, that she could run, that she could win. But Zayn al-Fayez didn't play fair. And now she wasn't just trapped in his world, she was part of it. Sitting in a private jet, high above the world, she watched the man beside her, the billionaire who had spent months trying to erase her, only to now protect her, claim her, own her. The ring on her finger felt heavy, too real, too final. A contract, a signature, a deal with the devil himself, all for one thing, their child. She had sworn she'd never let him take control, that she'd never become his. But then he leaned in, his lips just inches from her ear. His voice was low, dark, and devastating. You were never meant to be my enemy, Sophia. A pause, a smirk. You were meant to be my queen. And just like that, she realized the truth. This wasn't a love story. This wasn't a war. This was a game. And she had just made her final move. Checkmate. She thought she escaped, but she never stood a chance. Is she his prisoner or his queen? What would you do?